On dark nights, once every week and a day, the divine light of Archay is shrouded by the Necromancer's moon, the dark avatar of the god of undeath. Mannimarco, the king of worms, leader of the Order of the Black Worms, the first Lich, and the god that both is and isn't. When his celestial body, the before-mentioned Necromancer's moon, eclipses the influence of Archay, the practitioners of the dark arts find his cold influence upon their foul crafts. But just who is Mannimarco, and how is he both a god and not a god at the same time? How did he even achieve apotheosis in the first place? Let's take a deep dive into just how the god of necromancy came to be, and just what his motivations may be. Mannimarco was born just as any other elf is born, though he did have the advantage of coming into a noble house. Exactly which family he hailed from has been lost to history, whether through purposeful expungement or simple lack of record keeping is unknown. The young Mannimarco likely showed an interest and adeptness with the use of magicka early on, since, by his young adulthood, he had found his way to the Psijic Order to further his studies. The Psijic Order finds its home off the coast of the Almer Isles, on the Isle of Artarum, and was founded very early on in the history of Somerset. Though the exact date of their creation is unknown, the reasoning for it is, with that being a religious one. The Aldmer originally practiced the worship of all of their ancestors, but when they instead began to only worship the greatest of them, eventually going so far as to deify the likes of Auriel, Vanaster, and others, many of the eldest Aldmer disagreed fundamentally with this way of thinking. This isn't surprising, with powerful mages, especially Aldmer mages, generally being somewhat long-lived and stuck in their ways. These Altmer elders would leave Somerset and form the Psijic Order, a monastic group of study and learning that would practice the old ways of meditation and communion with both the Earthbones and the overall ancestors of the elves. The Psijics have been credited with the creation of mysticism, a school of magic which somewhat defies strict classification in its varied uses. Interestingly, the Psijics themselves claim to not necessarily use magicka to produce their spell-like wonders, instead crediting their miracles to the binding of nature and reality to one's own will through the aforementioned old ways of meditation and ancestor communion. Through the use of the old ways, the Psijics have been able to do things such as stopping time and phasing their island home in and out of existence for years at a time. This is the sort of thing we've only ever really seen accomplished by tonal disciplines such as the Thu'um or the Dwemer's tonal architecture. By the time Mannimarco joined the Psijics, he would prove to be among their most gifted students, being only rivaled by another high elf by the name of Vanus Galerian. Mannimarco and Vanus would go on to become rivals, but when Mannimarco became drawn to the study of necromancy, it was Vanus who would discover and admonish him, saying that he must cease his study of the dark arts at once or be forever corrupted by them. Unfortunately, Mannimarco had already grown to hate the idea of being confined to a mortal life, and continued to study his necromancy in secret. Vanus would discover this and bring it to the attention of the Psijic elders, who, heavily respecting the ancestor souls that Mannimarco was tampering with, would then expel their student from their order for disrupting the spirit world. Unfortunately for the rest of the world, Mannimarco had already learned much about the nature of reality from his study with the Psijics. His teachings would draw forth practitioners of the dark arts from across the world. They would gift him with dark artifacts and fonts of power, which he absorbed into himself. This strengthened Mannimarco greatly, but the energies he consumed would eventually begin to replace his own life force, turning his body into a half-corpse and his blood to poison and acid. Mannimarco would also spend time learning the secrets of the Dragon Priests, the Ayleid Conjurers, and other great masters of the arcane. All the while, he was building his power and arsenal of useful artifacts, biding his time until he could enact his true plans on Tamriel proper. Vanus Galerian would warn the Psijic Order about the threat Mannimarco would pose, but his cries would fall on deaf ears. Galerian would eventually leave the Isle of Artarum over this and other differences, and found the Mages Guild, an organization that would work much more closely with the populace and help to police witches and wizards across the Empire. Mannimarco, however, was still at work from within the shadows. It was he who would bring about Molag Bal's invasion into the mortal realm during the events of the Plane Meld of the Second Era, and it was his followers, now calling themselves the Order of the Black Worm, that would spread across Tamriel and attach Bal's insidious dark anchors to the mortal plane everywhere that they went. The Order of the Black Worm was also rumored to have been able to sacrifice souls to the Daedric princes, binding their victims' souls to oblivion and keeping them from their proper afterlife, though it is assumed that this ability was lost sometime after the Second Era. Keeping all of this in mind, Mannimarco never actually planned to allow Molag Bal to conquer the mortal plane. In his hubris, Mannimarco believed himself capable of trapping Molag, and then of using his own magics to usurp the prince's throne as the Daedric Lord of Domination. Mannimarco might have actually been able to pull this off, had he not been slain by an unnamed hero in the final hours of his plan. Still, even death would not defeat the foul wizard, for he had long since moved beyond what could accurately be described as alive. Shortly after his death, he planned to reconstitute himself as the first elven lich. Unfortunately for Mannimarco, his soul would be captured by Molag Bal and tortured for an undetermined amount of time. We do know that Mannimarco eventually escaped and that whatever Baal did to him was not enough to deter him from his goal of ultimately achieving godhood, though he did seem to give up on the idea of becoming a Daedric prince. Later in the Second Era, Mannimarco would once again revitalize his cult to spread his teachings of necromancy to the people. It was then that Vanus Galerion, having firmly established his mages guild by this point, led a group of battle mages and lamp knights against Mannimarco and his followers. Vanus would even still offer his one-time friend the chance to surrender, but, as was to be expected, Mannimarco would reject this proposal entirely. A great battle ensued, where fire scorched the earth and lightning burnt the very air. The necromancers summoned various undead creatures to their sides, which were slain by streams of light forged by the battle mages. When the smoke cleared and the ashes of undeath settled to the ground, Vanus and his knights were victorious. The majority of Mannimarco's followers were either slain or captured, and the worst of the King of Worms artifacts were seized, but not before Vanus Galerion was severely injured in his duel with the arch-necromancer. Unfortunately for Galerion, he would discover that Mannimarco had already turned himself into a lich by this point, and, while the fatal blow that had been dealt to Vanus by Mannimarco would claim his life, Mannimarco would go on to escape death once again. It was only some years later, during the events preceding the Warp in the West, a period where the ancient weapon known as the Numidium was once again activated, that Mannimarco would come out of hiding. We've already made an entire video about the Numidium and what it can do, but it can basically break reality and time. When it was switched on during the Warp in the West, the Numidium would cause something called a dragon break. Essentially, a dragon break is a period of time where multiple things can happen at once. Imagine various alternate timelines all being true in one reality, due to the Numidium's influence basically interfering with the god of time doing his job properly. During the Warp, various powers all got their hands on the Numidium and used it to achieve their own ends. During one of these alternate timelines, Mannimarco used the Numidium's semi-divine power source, the Mentella, to ascend to godhood himself. However, since the Warp allows multiple timelines to all be true at once, in another timeline that also happened, Mannimarco did not manage to ascend to godhood. In the Elder Scrolls world, the Aedra that built reality are all represented by planetary bodies. When one version of Mannimarco ascended to godhood, he used his powers to create the Necromancer's moon. The moon can interfere with Arkay's domain of life, but since Mannimarco only became a god in one timeline, he both is and isn't divine at the same time. This explains why the Necromancer's moon can only be seen to materialize into reality every 8 days. One should also understand that even the Mannimarco that did get his hands on the Mentella only partially succeeded in using it to achieve godhood, as the gem only possessed the souls of the avatars of a god, not that of a god itself. This also explains why Mannimarco continued to exist as a lich in the realm of Tamriel, even after the events of the Warp in the West. Basically, one Mannimarco became a god, while the other Mannimarco from the timelines in which he didn't achieve at least partial godhood continued to be an undead abomination that walked the face of Nirn. This mortal variant of Mannimarco would later be slain once more by the Mages Guild of the Third Era, thanks to the efforts of the Archmage Traven and his successor. It's unknown if Mannimarco will once again resurface in the future, whether in his mortal guise as a lich, or his semi-divine form as the half-god of necromancy and undeath. Though it is likely that, if the mortal soul of Mannimarco did not join with his godly oversoul after his death, that he may appear again in the future, once more trying to achieve the godhood that only one aspect of himself gained during the Warp in the West.